Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with a short little review video of the recent Company of Heroes 3 technical test. Now, I had the opportunity to play quite a bit of multiplayer, got to knock out some 1v1 as well as 2v2 matches. Also got to play quite a bit of customs against AI just to test out every one of the factions and what units and tech and all that they bring to the table. And so I had some opinions and some thoughts and considerations that I felt like I wanted to throw out there, and as a result decided to record a little review. I do want to discuss the different facets of the game, the sort of setting, as well as the factions involved and sort of the general overview of those factions. I wanted to talk a bit about the gameplay, the balance, the visuals, and of course compare them to some of the prior Company of Heroes games. Company of Heroes 2 in particular, though also some references to Company of Heroes 1 here and there. I'm far from being the most competitive multiplayer player or multiplayer participant when it comes to Company of Heroes, but I do quite enjoy playing the multiplayer side of things in the second game. And so I wanted to focus on that here. There isn't going to be much about in regards to single player, perhaps a little bit in regards to AI against AI, but ultimately the technical test did not include any portions of the campaign. There was just a simple tutorial, and so while for many people the actual dynamic campaign might be what attracts them to Company of Heroes 3 and is the main reason they might want to get this game, it's not going to be what I'm going to be covering in this review. I'm not really going to talk about it. Because the fact of the matter is, I didn't play the prior alphas, and I don't really have an opinion on it at the moment, or certainly don't have the information to make a solid opinion on it, even though I do think it could be quite a fun and engaging game mode in itself. Now, to kick things off, the game setting and design. The game is set in the Mediterranean theater of World War II. Of course, it's Company of Heroes. It's World War II. This is a new setting for the game. Previous Company of Heroes, of course, Company of Heroes 1 was purely based in the Western Front, largely focusing on the Normandy theater and France. Company of Heroes 2 focused on the Eastern Front, and the later DLCs and expansions tacked on missions representing the Ardennes and the later push into France, as well as Belgium and Germany proper. So that was Company of Heroes 2. Now, Company of Heroes 3 doing something a little bit different, going to the Mediterranean theater, which is pretty cool. It's one of those theaters of war that tends to get underrepresented in most media, whether that's video games, literature, or movies. Alongside maybe China, Burma, and India, it's probably the most underrepresented theater of the war. It's just something people don't really talk about. That said, when I saw that this was the theater being covered, I was pretty excited. I have to say, there's a lot of interesting events that went down in North Africa, a lot of new tactics, and a lot of captured equipment exchanging hands, and quite a significant amount of developments made on both sides of the war. So I felt that it would be an interesting theater to represent. To represent those factions involved, we've got 4 factions in the game. 2 of those represent the Axis, 2 of them represent the Allies. On the Axis side of things, we do have the DAK, the Deutsches Afrika Korps, which of course represents Rommel's forces in North Africa. The faction's design is mostly centered around units you would have seen in North Africa, kind of capping out with the heavy Tigers that made their first debut in Tunisia, at least their debut against the Western Allies in Tunisia. So it's very much a North Africa-centered lineup. The faction does have quite a few unique gimmicks. It's definitely focused more on recovering damaged or destroyed vehicles. It has two entire sub-commanders or sub-factions are dedicated to the Italians, which is pretty cool because we haven't seen Italians implemented in a Company of Heroes game ever. And it's one of those factions that tends to get overlooked or left out of RTS games in general, because most of them do and honestly just games in general, because most of those games do focus on later war time periods when the Italians were already knocked out of the war. There's also the issue of technology simply not keeping up with arms advances, even by the mid-war period, much less by the late war when the Italians were knocked out of the conflict. So the fact that we do get 2 factions with Gustatori, with Bersaglieri, we get L640s and M1340s, and we get the Semoventi 7518s. We get this whole variety of Italian armor and infantry. Is very cool to see represented. It's very cool to see it hit the field. The on the other hand, for the Axis powers, we also get the Wehrmacht. This mostly represents the Axis forces in Italy and Sicily. It's definitely more of a late war vibe. Where the DAC basically represents 1942 to 43 forces. The Wehrmacht represents forces ranging from 43 to the war's end. And so you do start seeing those heavier vehicles, such as the Panther or the Brummbär making their appearance. You do, of course, have some Fallschirmjäger representing some of the Fallschirmjäger forces fighting in the vicinity of Cassino, or Monte Cassino, I should say. And you get Nebelwerfers and all these later war German pieces of technology, which is definitely a different vibe. It's definitely a much more defensive faction, where the Afrika Korps is much more aggressive and offensive. The Wehrmacht is much more defensive, with various bunkers and static emplacements. Definitely a faction that reminds me a lot of the Ostheer in Company of Heroes 2, and is definitely reminiscent of them in their sort of roster lineup. Moving on to the Allies, we've got the Americans, who kind of represent a late war American force. They pack everything from M4 Shermans, M8 Greyhounds, up to Easy 8s and Chaffies. Definitely a bit of a odd choice of units, given this is supposed to be the Mediterranean and Italy. Off the top of my head, I don't believe Easy 8s or Chaffies even made it to Italy. If they did, it was very, very, very late in the war. The fact of the matter is, Italy was always a bit of a sideshow theater for both sides involved. It's why you saw a lot of these lower-end vehicles and weapons making their appearance on that front. You didn't see things like Sherman Fireflies until very late in the war either. American 76mm armed Shermans didn't make an appearance until, I believe, 1945 either, and they were available shortly after the Normandy invasion on the Western Front. So just something to consider there is that it's definitely a bit of a stretched, I would say, list, where some of the units don't quite make sense, though it's nowhere near as egregious as the British, who I'll get to in just a little second. But definitely a dynamic roster. It's cool to see that they've got these. They're able to tech into different veterancy upgrades for each of their units, so you can choose a different ability depending on how you want to play. So you might have the ability to sprint with your riflemen, or the ability to suppress with your riflemen, and things like that. Moving on to the British, this is probably the most disjointed roster in the game, and I'm not a fan of how they're executed, I should say, or how their faction is represented, I guess. I'm not entirely sure how to put it, but the fact of the matter is the British base roster represents the British in North Africa. You basically have a roster that ranges from Matildas, Humber armored cars, and these sort of lower end earlier vehicles, basically ranging from about 1942 with things like the M3 Stuart or the Grant, all the way up to 1943 in Tunisia, with probably the highest tech unit the entire roster gets being the 17-pounder. Otherwise, you've got vehicles like the Bishop, which was a very limited run and limited service unit, and things like that. So the Crusader 2s and Crusader 3s are also represented. So it's a very much a North Africa-centered list when you look at the base faction. But then all of the added units from sub-factions are basically themed around Italy. The Italian units, or sorry, not the Italian, the Indian units are represented do appear to be more of a reference to the Indians in Italy, with heavy artillery support. Gurkhas there as sort of a storm unit. You've got commando units that more represent the British airborne, like the 1st Airborne that was deployed in Sicily, more so than representing, say, the SAS or something in North Africa. You have, and then you've got units like the Centaur, which didn't even see service, as far as I'm aware, in the Italian theater. I believe only a handful were deployed, and it was up in Normandy alongside British commandos there. And then the heavy armor list, which includes literal units that are only prototypes or experimentals, like the Crusader A Mark I or the Black Prince, units that didn't see service in the war and were very much late war designs. And somehow they do make the cut for the British. So you get this very disjointed aesthetic and look, where you've got a North Africa list with a boatload of weapons from 44 and 45 in the sub-factions. It's not a balance issue, because Company of Heroes 2, or Company of Heroes never really cares about historical accuracy, so you've always gotten factions that have somewhat disjointed rosters, and unit stats are purely abstract. They're an M4 or whatever doesn't behave the way it would in real life. It doesn't function the way it would in real life. Neither does a Tiger tank or a Panther or whatever. So from a balance perspective, it's not an issue, but from a visual and immersion perspective, I just find it jarring. In comparison to DAC, the Deutsches Afrika Korps is much more concise. It's much more effectively represents North Africa, and I think, or it has a very, very distinct North Africa vibe. I guess the Stuka zu Fuß they get is not accurate for North Africa, but besides that, they basically represent the North African theater pretty well. Whereas the British, like I said, bit of a weird, disjointed mess of Italian and North African theater, and that's probably something that deserves its own video. I'm probably going to be doing a historical Company of Heroes 2 video in the future, but or Company of Heroes 3, I should say, video in the future, but for now, that is it for the sort of base game premise and the faction design. The British are still a very interesting faction. They do have a bunch of veterancy benefits, able to get additional veterancy for all of their different unit types, which is pretty nifty. And they do have a very cool sort of diverse roster with a whole variety of different unit types. Moving on to the actual gameplay, I would say the gameplay is this game's biggest strength, and that is a win. The gameplay is basically Company of Heroes 2, or going back further, Company of Heroes 1, but Company of Heroes 2 improved. It's just I would say, almost a straight upgrade. Things like vaulting over fences are automatic. You now have abilities like, you now have units such as towing. You've got trucks that can tow artillery pieces, or recrew, decrewed team weapons. So you've got these soft skin vehicles. You've got crits that I think the crit system, while perhaps a little iffy at perhaps needing some tweaks, the crit system is a bit revised from Company of Heroes 2. Now, to score permanent sort of crit, you need to land an AT grenade or Panzerfaust on a unit that is under 50, that knocks it under 50% HP, rather than the previous very unforgiving 25% threshold. On the flip side, though, any hit from an AT grenade or AT rocket of that's like a Panzerfaust is causing a temporary slow on a vehicle. So that is a pretty, I think, interesting change, and I think it is generally a benefit, and a benefit, even though some of the values might need to be tweaked. We're seeing vehicle armor reworked, so now you've got front, side, and rear armor. That makes positioning your vehicles much more significant. It's no longer a question of just can you hit the front half of the vehicle or the rear half of the vehicle, and with the very abstract system that Company of Heroes 2 had, it's a little more representative of how a vehicle's armor layout might actually be. We've got you've got the new breaching system, so you can breach and clear structures, which is kind of interesting. We've got there's just a bit of the actual base building aspect. Base building is a little more involved than it was in Company of Heroes 2. Company of Heroes 2, you had two factions that literally didn't even do base building, with Americans and Brits. And then you had the Wehrmacht and Soviets, who basically had a very linear build tree. The OKW was a little interesting with the tech trucks. There's no equivalent to that in Company of Heroes 3. That said, base building is kind of, on one end, it's a little streamlined, because now you don't need engineers in base to build anything. You literally just have guys run out from the HQ structure, and they build the structure they're supposed to build. But you do have a couple sort of tech structures or support structures, like medical bunkers that or medical tents that you can deploy. And that puts a little bit of more interesting, puts a little bit more flavor, I would say, to the base building side of the game, even though it's still very much not a focus of Company of Heroes 3. It just gives it a little more spice, makes it a little more interesting. You've got a bit more variety when it comes to tech, so you actually have upgrades that affect unit performance. The Americans can get different sort of command posts that allow them to unlock airstrikes or different half track variants, stuff like that. So you've got this variety of and that makes each faction a little more diverse. The fact that you just can get different sort of weapon options, or you've got just damage upgrades for units, and rather than just what Company of Heroes 2 had, where you literally only had unlock grenades, unlock weapon racks, and that was kind of it. Sometimes you could deploy like a medical guy or a mechanical crew on a building, but that was kind of it. But you get a little more depth with that. Balance, moving on to the balance section, is quite frankly awful. I would not, if you're looking for a competitive experience, Company of Heroes 3 is not it, in my opinion. Like I said, I'm not the greatest competitive player by any stretch of the imagination. I'm at best, I would say, like a middling player for Company of Heroes 2. That said, the balance, and I think this has been echoed by everybody from top tier Company of Heroes 2 players all the way down to noobs. The balance is not there. Factions such as the DAC can just crank out bajillion Italian light armored vehicles. The Gustatori, for example, are kind of a really powerful unit at the moment. There's definitely some mechanics, and it's true. Just about every faction right now has at least something that's busted. The DAC is the one that, to me, pops out the most, or has popped out the most. It might also be just because I've been playing a lot of allies. So, to be completely fair, it's been the one I've noticed. Whereas the Wehrmacht seems much more reasonably balanced. But take that as you will. I definitely do feel that the Africa Corps is probably the most broken at the moment. So that said, Company of Heroes 2 also did not release in a great balancing state, so I feel like the balance will be something that improves in the future. It's just that if you're looking for a competitive experience right out of the box, it's not going to be there, and I wouldn't expect it. Then finally, the most sore sticking point, I think, for people is the visuals. And to put it mildly, they're not great. I wouldn't say they're terrible. I think a lot of people make them out to be some abomination, some horrible, horrible thing. They're not awful. But that said, the colors are washed out. I wouldn't say the textures or the unit visuals are any better than they are in Company of Heroes 2. I certainly wouldn't consider it an upgrade. Stuff like the flame effects are just not, or the explosions are just not as meaty or impactful as they feel in Company of Heroes 2. In general, I would say that at best the visuals are a side grade, more likely actually a downgrade from Company of Heroes 2. For me personally, it doesn't matter. I don't care about my visuals that much in an RTS game. I love the hell out of Command & Conquer Generals. 0 Hour, it's a game that looks like crap by today's standards. I love games like Age of Empires 2. It doesn't look great by today's standards. Let's be honest here. I still I even still enjoy playing Dawn of War 1, also a game that doesn't look too great. When I play Total War Warhammer, I don't zoom in to look at the units to watch all the animations. So I just don't care about the visuals that much. That said, if you are somebody who cares about the visuals and it matters to you a lot, Company of Heroes 3 is not going to impress you. It is probably going to let you down quite badly. And I feel that it's been the biggest gripe with the game that I've seen from people. And it's a perfectly fair critique. The game does not look good for a game coming out in 2023, in my opinion. But for me personally, as an RTS player who mostly just plays for the gameplay, and I don't care that much about the cleanliness, I guess, of the visuals, it doesn't bother me too much. But I definitely do see where people are coming from, and I agree that it's not in a great state. Hopefully it's something they go back to and fix, or like fixes. If not, or improves upon at least. If not, that would be most unfortunate, I would say. Not the deal breaker for me, but something I think is important to bring up. And finally, how do I feel about the game as a whole? Is it worth picking up on pre-order? Personally, at the moment, I am not going to be buying it on pre-order. I'm not going to be buying it early. Maybe if we get more information about the campaign and I feel that the single player is worthwhile, maybe I'll pick it up early. But until I'm more confident about that, I'm not going to be buying it for the multiplayer. Like I said, I think the gameplay is good. I think the gameplay is, if it continues to get the love Company of Heroes 2 kind of got, I think the gameplay is going to be great eventually. I think it's going to clean up and be very nice. But at the moment, having good gameplay alone does not offset the fact that the balance is terrible, and that I think the faction, that some of the faction designs just don't really jive with me. I don't really like the weird historical mishmash of units. Personally, it just isn't something that suits me. Which is kind of funny, I suppose, when I'm somebody who says I don't care about visuals, and I don't care about the aesthetics, I guess, but I do care about sort of the how a faction is designed to sort of represent a specific time period, and Company of Heroes 3 just doesn't really do it for me. So that's really my main gripes, and why I'm going to hold off. I feel like the historical side of things might be somewhat rectified by campaigns. You're probably going to have, maybe we'll have a North Africa campaign and Italy campaign, so then it won't seem as out of place that you've got North Africa Brits fighting in North Africa, if they like lock out the Black Prince and you can't get it or whatever. Maybe it won't be that bad. But from my multiplayer perspective, I'm not a huge fan. And from the And like I said, the balance isn't great. So for now, for me, it's a no-go. I'm not going to be picking it up. Like I said, it might change if I feel like either the balance is improved, which it might. They've still got a couple weeks to fix it before launch, or not even fix, but to improve stuff. And I also haven't really seen too much of the campaign yet, or enough to really make a decision on it. So I'm waiting, and that is my 2 cents on the matter. If you are somebody who just wants to give the game a shake, just enjoys Company of Heroes games, you're probably going to enjoy it. Like I said, if visuals matter a lot to you, probably not the game that's going to make you happy. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. And if you guys got the opportunity to play a technical test, or if you just watched others playing, if you got the opportunity to watch any of the YouTubers who were covering it, let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think it's worth picking up early? Are you going to be picking it up early? Do you think it's a busted mess? Are you somewhere in the middle, kind of like me? Let me know. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions down in the comments section. As always, I do appreciate the feedback. A little bit of an update on the state of the channel. For those of you who have held out this long, unfortunately, this video does not represent any return to Total War Warhammer videos. It's been at this point close to a year since the last video I put out, and unfortunately, Total War Warhammer 3 is just not in a state that I enjoy playing. I was very much in the Total War games for multiplayer, and the state of the game multiplayer-wise, between Domination, which is a mode I'm not a fan of, and the state of general faction balance, is just unfortunately doesn't work for me, and so I'm not going to be going back to Total War content, at least not for the foreseeable future. That said, I might be putting out some more videos regarding Company of Heroes 3. Like I said, I'm probably going to do a video regarding the history specifically, because it's something I'm very passionate about. History matters to me, and I feel like some marks were missed on that in this game. So history, some history videos maybe will be coming out again, and maybe we'll be doing some other games as well. There are other more arcadey and sort of laid back games I have been enjoying playing quite a bit lately. So maybe we'll be seeing some of those on the channel. But unfortunately, and I am sorry about to say, but Total War Warhammer 3, at least for the foreseeable future, is not going to be making a comeback on the channel. Though who knows what the future holds. So, for those of you stuck around to the bitter end here, I do appreciate it. As always, leave your thoughts, opinions, and comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.